respect to your project execution. So let's talk about how to set the first baseline with respect to your project. I'm just moving back to my project 2010. So this is a sample plan which we'll be using in today's webcast. I remember on the third session of the series, we talked about creating the work breakdown structure, and we have talked about this attribute or the field called task mode. Task mode is ideally a new feature that was added in project 2010 that can take one of these two values. Can be either auto-scheduled or manually scheduled. When I say an activity is manually scheduled, which means we, the user, have complete control over the dates, the duration, the work, which means Microsoft project will not try to calculate this by any way. But when you say an activity is auto-scheduled, which means when we try to revise the duration or the effort or when its predecessor is getting affected, naturally these dates will get recalculated. Now let's take this example. You can see there are a few set of activities which I have, and you can see there are two different icons that are displayed in the task mode. The one that is having the arrow is the auto-scheduled activities, and the one that is having the board pin is the manually scheduled task. So now let's say that the first activity, which was estimated as 1 day, now gets revised to 2 days. You would be able to find that the research activity start and finish is not getting adjusted accordingly. The reason is this activity is currently manually scheduled. So in order to fix this problem, I just need to right click and say respect the links. Now when you can see somewhere at the bottom there is another manually scheduled task that is having a similar problem. So I may not be able to respect links every time when there is a conflict. So what we prefer is when it comes to baselining, it is an approved version of your plan. When I say an approved version of your plan, it is assumed that the start date and the finish date are realistic, which means they should not have any activities that are manually entered, or none of these activities should be manually scheduled tasks. So the first step is let's make sure that all these tasks are auto-scheduled. So I'm just going to change it to auto-schedule. Now you will be able to find all my tasks are auto-scheduled, and let's quickly validate. You can just go to the view ribbon. You can see there is a filter drop-down available. On the filter, I might be able to select which are auto-scheduled and which are manually scheduled. So let me go to more filters. You can find there is a filter called manually scheduled task. Let me say highlight. You can see none of these activities are highlighted, which means all these activities are auto-scheduled. So which means we are safe to do a baselining. The second question we might have is, so what is a baseline first, right? So when we say baseline, people might say the data what I see on the screen is what I mean by baseline. So why should I do a baselining in project? If you observe the data, the work, duration, start and finish, as you start executing these project activities, these values may change, which means that their actuals might be different than your estimates. So a value that is changing on a continuous basis cannot be called as an approved version. So the first step we need to make is we need to take a copy of this data and we need to save it in a safe place. So when you say we need to take a copy and save it, it's not that we should save it in a separate file. We are just going to take a copy of these fields, what I have just highlighted, into another set of fields in the same MPP file. So the first step is we need to understand the view you are now looking at. As you know, the view is the Gantt chart view, and currently the table we are now looking at within this view is the entry table. You can just observe on my top leftmost corner, the small tooltip reads table is entry, view is Gantt chart. So another way by which you can look at your current table is on your view ribbon, go to the table option, you can see entry is selected. So the entry just reflects your current schedule which you have planned as of today. So as you start executing the project, the values in the entry table will go across multiple revisions based on your progress. So when we talk about baselining, as I have already mentioned, we need to take a copy of this data, save it in a safe place. So these data are going to be updated into another set of fields in the task table, resource table, and the assignments table. But let's first check whether the schedule is already baselined or not. So there are two ways of doing it. People might either insert columns, okay, they might insert columns to expose the baseline data. The second option I would prefer is you can just change the table from the entry table to the baseline table. So the baseline table will have set of columns that exposes the baseline data of the current MPP file. So let me click on tables. You can find the current table don't have anything called baselines. So I'm going to go to more tables. You can see the other tables supported in this current view. So let me select baseline and say apply. Now you can see the same set of task names is appearing. The view is still Gantt chart, but the fields that are being displayed are totally different. In your entry table, the field names were work, duration, start, and finish. If you look at your baseline table, which I've just highlighted, you can see the column names read as baseline duration, baseline start, baseline finish, baseline work, baseline cost. So you can see these data are coming from the same MPP file, and currently its values are not updated. So if I want to do the baselining in Microsoft Project, the first check which we need to make is make sure all your activities are auto-scheduled. If not, make sure that you try to do the check, do the resource and the schedule optimization before you get the approval from the customer. Once the customer has approved, the next immediate step you need to do is you need to ensure you take a copy of your data, what you have planned that has been approved by the customer into the baseline. So to do the baselining, you just need to go to the project ribbon. You see there is an option called set baseline. So let me select set baseline. So at any point in time in a project, right, so you might have only one baseline, which is the recently approved one is what we call as the latest baseline. In the set baseline dialog box, you can see there are two options. One is called set baseline, set interim plan. The second option is whether you want to set the baseline for the entire project or for the selected task. Let me park the selected task option later, but let's talk about the first radio button called set baseline. When you say set baseline, we are trying to take a copy of your current plan which you saw in your entry table into the baseline fields of your three tables: task, resources, and assignments. In Microsoft Project, you can have 11 versions of baseline. So this might confuse most of us. We might ask, why should I have 11 baselines if I need only one? Very true. But in Microsoft Project, of these 11, only one is active. The remaining 10 are inactive baselines. So the active baseline is what we call as baseline. And baseline 1 to baseline 10 is just used to store the old versions of your baseline. For example, when you start your project, you will have your baseline and baseline. After a few weeks or a few months, when there is a approved change request and you incorporate the change request as a part of your plan, maybe due to some reason you might want to take a copy of your first baseline and save it somewhere else so that you can either compare it, or you might want to cancel the current baseline and just go back to the previous baseline. So the baseline 1 to baseline 10 is being provided by Microsoft just to have a backup of your old baselines. But remember, baseline 1 to baseline 10 will not be used for reporting or status and performance. It is just used by MS Project just to hold your old copies. So let's do the first baseline. So I'm just going to select baseline, which is going to be my active baseline, and I'm going to do it for my entire project. So let me select entire project and say OK. Now you would be able to observe a few changes have happened on my screen. So the baseline duration column gets updated, the baseline start, baseline finish, baseline work, and baseline cost. So as you can see, when you do a baseline, internally the task table, the resource table, and the assignments table, the plan data gets copied into the respective baseline fields. So you might now conclude that baselining is all about copying data from the entry table to the baseline table. This statement is not very much true. The reason is baselining is not something to do with what you see on your screen. Rather, it is more happening at a file level rather than at a view level. So let me give a small example to explain baselining in a different terms. I'm just going to change my view to the resource sheet. On my resource sheet, you can see there are 3 resources, and this is what my plan data is. So I can now change my table from the entry table to the baseline table here. So I'm just going to change my table here to, let's say, work. Now you are able to see that for the same set of resources, I can see some baseline data there also, which means the baselining is not about what data you see on the screen. It is all about taking a copy of your current plan and storing it in the baseline related fields of the 3 tables. So I'm just going to go back to my Gantt chart. Now we have done our first baseline. So now if you look at your entry table now, the entry table's data, work, duration, start and finish, and your baseline table's data will look alike. Now, please remember your baseline data, though it looks editable by default, I recommend that don't edit these values. The reason is when you try to revise the baseline duration from 2 days to 1 day or 2 days to 5 days, you might expect the finish date of your other activities or the start date of the other activities to get adjusted. Remember, it will not happen for baseline related fields. The reason is baseline fields are just copy of your data what you saw in your entry table. It's only the fields that are there in the entry table which are calculated ones, which means when I try to revise the duration of my prepare from 2 days to 3 days, you can see that other activities will get updated, but the same will not happen for baseline related fields. Now let me look at the right hand side. You can see currently the bars start with respect to the start date and the bar finishes with respect to the finish date. You might want to look at the baseline data of these activities. To look at the baseline data of these activities, either you can change the table to the baseline table, or you can just right click on your chart area, select the show or hide bar styles, select baseline, and you can see the 11 baselines will be listed here, and where there will be a small label printed saying which baseline was updated, which baseline is empty. So I'm just going to select baseline. Now you can see that below all these blue color bars, you can see there is a small red color bar drawn, just representing that these activities have been baselined in Microsoft Project. So one of the most common mistakes I have seen done by schedulers is they don't do a baselining. They just use the entry table just to reflect what has been planned, and they just update the actual and the finish to record the actuals or revise the estimates. But remember, there are 2 tables which you have seen today. One is called as the entry table, which you are now looking on your screen. The second is a baseline table, which stores your baseline data. So remember, your entry table will always be dynamic. So as of now, your entry table and your baseline table will look alike because we have not progressed in this project. So Microsoft Project assumes that we are going to start as per your original date and we are going to finish as per your original dates. So this is what is happening as of today. Okay. Now, the second step which I just wanted to tell you with respect to baselining is, whenever there is an approved change request that comes in, you might want to revise your estimates and you might want to incorporate it without impacting the entire baseline. So I'm going to take 2 different scenarios now. The first scenario is, let's look at, we might want to add a new set of activities which might change the dependencies of the existing task. The second scenario is, one of the existing activity is removed from your project, which means we are trying to descope the objectives. So let's look at scenario 1. In scenario 1, we just said we are going to add a new set of activities to your project plan. At the same time, the new set of activities may or may not impact your critical path, which means the dependencies may also change. So the first step, what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to go to my table, And I'm just going to show you this small table called tracking table because it could be quite useful for you to appreciate how this updating the baseline for change request works. So I just changed my table to tracking. You can see that there are a new set of fields that are being displayed. So you can see the actual start, actual finish, percentage complete, and the other fields related to actuals. But for a moment, I just want you to focus only on actual start, actual finish, percentage complete, and the actual duration. Okay. So let's say the prepare document task is 100% complete. So I'm just going to say this activity is 100% complete. The moment I say the activity is 100% complete, the actual start and the actual finish is automatically calculated, and project assumes that the remaining duration of the task is 0 and your actual duration is same as your estimates. But for a moment, let's assume that this activity got completed, but it took more than 2 days. Let's say this activity took 3 days to complete. Now the moment I say 3 days, you can see the actual duration gets revised. You can see the actual finish date is also getting pushed. Because of this 1 day slip on my first activity, naturally it might have some impact on the start date and the finish date of your other task. So now the next question I have is, how do I know the revised start date and the finish date of your other activities? So if I just go to my baseline table, the baseline table will just have what has been promised to the customer. It will not just talk about my revised start date and the finish date of my other activities. So if I want to know the current estimates on the current start date and the finish date of my other task, you just need to change your table back to the entry table. Remember, the entry table is also called as your current schedule. So now you can see on your entry table, because the first activity got completed, its duration got revised to 3 days, and the finish date got revised. Because of the finish date, the other activity is also getting impacted. So as you can ideally see, based on your actuals, your entry table is always going to get adjusted accordingly. And this is the power of your entry table. So the entry table will not be static like your baselining. Now let's take the first scenario. In my first scenario, let's say that you have to add a new set of activities. For example, let's say that after the approval activity, right, after the approval activity, you might want to have a final approval before you get into the design. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the task ribbon, and okay, so I'm just going to insert a new task. Okay, so I'm just going to change the color of this so that you know this is a new task we have added. And let's say this activity is currently manually scheduled, so I'm just going to make it auto scheduled. So project assumes that this activity can start at the project start date, and by default project assumes this activity can complete in 1 day. So it starts on Friday morning and it completes on Friday evening. But we know that this final approval can happen only after activity 4. So I'm just going to say the predecessor is 4. And let's say that the approval is going to be done by a resource, and let's say the resource is Sai. Okay, fine. So I have done the approval, and if you closely observe, the approval does not have any successor. Okay, so I'm just going to look at my relationship diagram on the bottom. You can see after final approval, I don't have any other activity. So what I'm going to do is after final approval, let's say that we want to start the design activity. So I'm just going to link these two tasks. Okay. So as you can see here, I have added a new set of activities to your project plan. Okay. Now, you might want to you have added this new activity, very good, but you can see that if you look at your baseline table now, let me turn off my relationship diagram. You can see the final approval is not yet baseline because it's a new task that has been added after doing a baselining. So I'm just going to go back to my entry table. So if you just observe that this is a new task that got added, so the question what we might have is, okay, how do I baseline now? So there are two different thoughts people might have. People might say that I need to baseline the complete project. The second type of people might say I need to baseline only the new task and the impacted activities. So let's take the first thought. For those who say that we need to baseline the entire project, please remember when you baseline the entire project, what happens is from prepare document to sign off, all the work, duration, start, finish, all these activities will get copied again to the baseline table, which means that your baseline duration of your prepared document will now be 3 days rather than 2 days, which means you lose your original estimates. And secondly, the slippages that has happened because of that 1 day slip will disappear automatically, because when you baseline the entire project, you might lose track of which activity started ahead, which activity got delayed. So the first step what we need to do is, before we start adding a new activity, we need to take a copy of your baselining. So I'm just going to undo these changes what I've done. So the first step what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a backup of my current baseline, okay? So that let's say after doing the scenario, if we change our mind, we can always revert to the different baseline. So how do I take a backup of my current baseline? Go to the project ribbon, go to the set baseline. Now you need to select the second radio button called set interim plan. So as the name says, it is not a baselining we are doing. We are just trying to take a copy of a set of data into another set of fields in your same file. So I'm just going to say copy baseline to baseline 1. So the purpose of me doing this is, after getting an approval of the change request, if the customer changes his mind saying that can we go back to the first baseline we had 2 months before, you can always say copy baseline 1 to baseline, because your baseline 1 will anyway have your old baselines. So I'm just going to take a copy of baseline to baseline 1 for the entire project. You may not observe any changes on your screen because now you are only looking at your entry table, and towards your right the black color bars are just the baseline data and not the baseline 1 data. The second step is we might want to include this change request now. But remember, before you add the change request, you need to remember what is your current start date and the finish date of your activities. The reason is, after adding the change request and changing dependencies, you might see that there are certain activities that might get delayed because of the change request, and the customer should be aware of that impacted activities. So the first step is I'm just going to take a backup of my start finish into another set of fields. So let me insert those two fields on your screen so that you can understand it. So the first field I'm going to insert is start 1. The second field I'm going to insert is finish 1. As you can see, these two fields are custom fields. These have been provided by Microsoft for us to store any kind of data. But we are going to use these two fields to just take a copy of your current start finish into start 1 and finish 1. To take a copy, you just need to go to the set baseline again, go to the set interim plan, carefully read through the first radio button. It says set interim plan copy, schedule start finish. So when you say schedule start finish, it represents the start finish fields into start 1 and finish 1, which is the next set of columns I have inserted. And I want to do it for the entire project so that I can compare it later. Now you can see that start would have been copied to start 1, finish would have been copied to finish 1. Remember, start 1 and finish 1 are not calculated fields, which means if I try to revise my duration here or my work, or if I adjust the start finish, this will not have any impact on start 1 and finish 1. Now with this idea, let me go ahead, insert the new activity. And I'm just going to say the new activity is auto-scheduled. And this activity let's say that the predecessor of this activity is going to be approval, and let's say the successor of this activity is design. So as you can see, I have an activity final approval. I have set my predecessors and successors, and you can see to your right, this activity is being connected with the predecessor and successor. The second step is, let's say that after doing the final approval, maybe currently if you look at it, there is a sign-off activity. The sign-off activity is currently 4,7. I'm just going to change approval to final approval here. Okay, good. So I have connected all my tasks, and let me assign a resource to this activity. Let me say SA here, and let's say this activity will take around 3 days to complete. So the moment you say 3 days, right, so naturally the finish date of this activity got impacted, and you can see the successor activities or the activities that are linked to it, their start date and their finish date is also getting revised. Now, this is what the impact the new activity has created in your current plan. So as you have already seen, doing the baselining for the entire project for approved change request will not work. So you need to incrementally update your baselining. So as you can see now, the new set of activities have impacted row number 4, 5, 6, and 7. So it's quite easy to visualize here without looking at start and finish, just by the change highlighting colors that these activities got impacted. But change request will not be so simple like this. You might want to add, let's say, 5 to 10 different activities across different phases of your project because of an approved change request. Naturally, your changes will be distributed, and it's quite difficult to find which activity got impacted, which activity did not get impacted, because you need to share only those activities that got impacted to the customer for approval and review, right? So now I have done it. So the job we have is we need to compare start with start one, finish with finish one. There are two ways of doing it. You can either compare it with your human eyes, or you can also create a custom filter. How do you create a filter in project 2010? Go to the view ribbon. You can see there is a filter drop down. Choose the option called new filter, and let me give the new filter name here called impacted task. So when you say impacted task, I'm trying to compare start one with start. So I'll say start one finish one. So start one should not be equal to start, or finish one does not equal finish. Okay, so I'm trying to compare that this filter should highlight only those tasks where start one is not same as start, or finish one is not same as finish. So let me save it. Okay, so I think I need to enter it with brackets. Okay, good. Now I have created this filter. That filter will be listed on top. You can see custom impacted task. So when I apply that filter, it's only those activities that got impacted will be listed on your screen. Now our job is quite simple. You just need to select only those tasks that have been listed by this filter, and go to the project, set baseline, right? So you might now ask that now I have two baseline and baseline 1. Where should I update my 4 tasks? Remember, the 4 tasks will ideally go to your current baseline, which is your active baseline, that is baseline. And you should not go for the entire project here. You should just go for your selected task. Once you have set selected task, there is a small checkbox that gets enabled. It says roll up baselines to all summary tasks, or from subtask into the selected summary task. To understand these two checkboxes detail, I'm canceling this option, and let me turn on the project summary task. You can see that currently, if I just look at my baseline table, you can see the overall baseline work is around 12 days. Okay. Now, when you try to baseline those selected activities, naturally the baseline duration of your project summary task should also get impacted. But by default, when you select those 4 tasks and when you say set baseline and you say selected task, without turning on these 2 options, what happens is only the selected task will get baseline, whereas the summary task will not get recalculated. So it's better that you turn on roll-up baselines to all summary tasks, and I'm saying okay. Now you will be able to observe that your baseline duration, the baseline work of your summary, project summary is also getting revised, and also that the 4 tasks that has got added in your project is also getting baselined. So let me remove this filter and let me change my table to the entry table. Now if you closely observe to your right, it's only activities and the activities that follow that are getting baseline. The activities that are before that are still having that 1 day slippages in your project. So this is how you need to take care of updating a baseline for approved change request. The second scenario which I was discussing was how do I remove an activity because of an approved change request. So when you say remove, right, so people think I need to delete it, delete that row from your Microsoft project. But let's take this example. Let's say that design activity. Okay, so the design activity got removed from your project. So what people try to do is they'll go to the design. Okay, and let me show you the baseline table. So they will select design and they will just say delete. But before I delete it, before I press the delete button, I just want you to observe the baseline duration, the total baseline work of this task. So when I remove design, that 8 hours should be subtracted from the baseline work, and if this 3 days, if it was part of my critical path, it should be subtracted from the project summary task. But let's see what happens. When you delete, as you can see, the task gets removed, but you can see it will not have rolled up automatically to its parent. The second problem you have is you don't have any traceability now. Let's say after a few months down the line, when the customer is asking you, or you might want to look at, hey, we had an activity something like this, but that activity is now missing. We don't know what was the estimates we had at the beginning of the project. Naturally, those kinds of questions cannot be answered now because you have done a hard delete. It's very difficult to recover that task now. So what I recommend is don't delete a row like this, like what you do in Microsoft Excel. Rather do it in a very polished way. So I'm just going to go back to my entry table. So on my entry table, let's say if I want to remove my final approval, I recommend don't delete it. Maybe just color code that activity in a different color first. Okay, like final approval, and say, and you can just change the task name if you need, so that people who look at it know that this activity got deleted. The second thing is when you say an activity is deleted, naturally this task duration will be 0, correct? So I'm just going to say it is 0. So when you say the activity's duration is 0, which means that if you look at your baseline data of this particular task, it will still have this 24, which means we still need to have a backup of my old data, which I'll still have, but I don't lose my old data because now it's still available if I take a copy of this current baseline to baseline 1. Okay. The second step is once you have made that activity duration to 0, you can see on your right the activity will automatically get converted to a milestone. But remember, this activity is not a milestone. It is just that this activity got deleted and we said 0. Microsoft project assumes that it is a milestone. So what I would recommend is just override the default symbol of this task. So just do a mouse over on top of this diamond and just double click. Now just change the shape to something else, and just change the color if you want, so that people at least know that this is not a milestone but a deleted activity. Okay. So the advantage now you are having now is, though the activity got deleted, right, from your current baseline, and still your baseline 1 will have your data. So when I select the selected task, when I apply the filter here, you can see the deleted activity got removed. Right, so when I apply the filter called impacted activities, so it's only this activity got impacted. So I'm just going to select project, set baseline, selected task, roll up to all baselines. So let me change my table to the entry table, and let me reset the filter to no filter. So as you can see, I've not done a hard delete, right? So I've just made sure that I reduce the duration or the work of this task to 0 in order for this to work. The second step after you have baseline the project or re-baseline the project is you might want to look at comparing baselines. So if you look at your current plan, we have 2 baselines now. One is baseline, one is baseline 1. How do I compare both baselines? So there are 2 ways of doing it. You can either use the table approach or you can use a chart approach. Let's talk about the chart approach first. The first step is you need to change your view. So go to the view ribbon, click on other views, more views, and select the view called multiple baseline Gantt. Remember, this view will give meaningful information only if you have multiple baselines, which means you have baseline 1, baseline 2, and so on. So let me select apply. Now you are able to observe that towards your left you see the same entry table, but towards your right you can see there are 2 lines drawn for every task. The blue color line just represents baseline, and the red color line represents baseline 1. So you can see that because of the new change request, right, so these activities got impacted, and this is the new task that got added as a part of your change request. But towards your right, if you want to look at the baseline data, right, so if you want to look at you have a table for baseline, so you might want to look at baseline 1 data on the other side. So there is no baseline 1 table by default. I recommend you edit the baseline table, or you take a copy of your baseline table. Just change the name of the table to baseline 1. And you can see towards your left, there are a few field names being listed. You can see the field names are baseline duration, baseline start, baseline finish. You can just change it to baseline 1 duration, baseline 1 start, baseline 1 finish, baseline 1 work, cost. So as you can see, I have just changed the field names, and let me change the titles. So good. So let me select OK, and you have baseline 1, and let me say apply. Now you can see in your baseline 1, the newly deleted activity is not part of your first baseline, but it was part of your current baseline now. Now the last step is, after your baseline date, you would have observed that baselining is all about taking a copy of your current plan into a set of fields. So after a point in time, you would find all the 11 baselines are full, right? So you might want to clear one of those baselines. How do I clear it? So just go to the same set baseline option under project ribbon, select the clear baseline option, and choose what baseline you want to clear. So in this case, if I want to clear baseline 1, I select baseline 1 here, I select it for the entire project, and I hit the OK button. Now you can see the baseline 1 table gets reset, and towards your right you can see the red color line automatically disappears. Good. So let's quickly recap what we have seen. Okay, so the first step is, in order to do a first baseline, make sure that you switch all your tasks to auto scheduled, and to view the baselining, make sure that you change your tables to the baseline table. To do your first baseline, go to the project tab, choose the set baseline option, and as you know, there are 11 baselines there in MS Project, but the active baseline is baseline, and baseline 1 to baseline 10